Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks very much, Helen. So this is about Ellen Wilkinson, who one of the ladies said she met her when she was at school, and and in her time, the most famous British politician, one of the most famous woman in the world, 1940s. And it's odd that you don't really remember her anymore. Now, this is me and Hayley Doherty. Hayley Doherty played Ellen Wilkinson in my play, which I was put on at the People's History Museum and the Central Library. And it was supported by the Arts Council. And it's interesting thing about Hayley, she's a graduate of Bristol Old Vic, which was opened by Ellen Wilkinson when she was Education Minister. So it's a nice connection. And Hayley's a local girl from Manchester. She's a nice girl. So we did this play about Ellen, who was known as Red Ellen, and she was only little, 4'8", 4'9", and yet she was a powerhouse. And I did this little graphic which shows her addressing speakers as one of the speakers at Trafalgar Square. And in her time, she would have up to 50,000 people come and listen to her fiery speeches. She was a great socialist, and she was a great fighter for women's rights in particular, to be paid properly and to have the vote. And she was the organizer for many unions in Manchester. So you can see here just how powerful she would have been as a speaker. Now, the interesting thing is,
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Although she was the most famous woman politician in the world, today she's barely remembered. And in Manchester, you'd expect a statue to her, wouldn't you? I mean, she was the only woman in the 1945 government. She founded UNESCO. She was partially involved in founding the United Nations. She helped to denazify Germany with education. And of course, she created the three-tier education system in this country. Now, people think, why would a socialist give the grammar schools more power? But she believed in 11+ because she fought her way right from a child in great poverty to get an education, eventually graduating from University of Manchester, and every step of the way was a struggle and done by scholarship. So she created the 11+ and the secondary moderns. And I went to a secondary modern. I got dragged up there, and I don't forgive her for that. But and of course, you finesse your way into grammar schools, but that doesn't matter in the end. I mean, that was her belief, and that's what she did. So as I say, there should be a statue to her, but believe it or not, in Manchester, there's only 2 statues of women in public. And one was Queen Victoria, and the new one, Emmeline Pankhurst, arrived 117 years after the last woman. And yet women have done so much in this city. And so I think it's a good idea to talk about her and to remember her. So here she is. She was 57 when she passed away. She took an overdose. She was in great pain and so on. And she had childhood health problems from the beginning, but she never really gave up. And here you can see when she was fairly close, when she was about 50, 55, 56, and a government minister, and shakes a fist at the world, at the people, at injustice. And that was her kind of the kind of impression that she always gave. She was known as the fiery particle, the mighty atom, because she was only kind of tiny, really, but she had such energy, it was earth-shaking. Now, she loved speed, fast cars. This is her with a motorbike. And she had an Austin 7, and she'd literally travel everywhere breaking the speed limit because she wanted to get things done really quickly. She was often in trouble with the police, often getting speeding tickets, even when she was a minister, because she used to drive her Austin Taurus really, really fast through the streets, often on the wrong side of the road to get there. And her motto was to be tireless. So much to do and so little time. She was also, besides a politician, a journalist. She actually broke the news of Hitler's invasion of Poland to the world. She went to Germany. She wrote an article, and she hid beneath the bedclothes so she wouldn't be heard. And she did a little radio transmission. Incredible woman. She wrote books, 3 or 4 novels. She was a member of the Bloomsbury set with Vanessa and the other ladies who are members. This is one of her books. I don't know if you can see it. And this is about a parliament it's called The Division Bell Mystery. And to think she managed to write 3 books, did journalism, was an MP. I mean, she's a real example, isn't she, of you know, how to achieve things. And when you look at her in perspective, can you see her? There she is. And look at all those men around her, surrounding her, but she's still, her personality is shining out. And although she was quite a petite lady, and these were members of the other politicians, really, but she was always the kind of shiniest example. So despite her humble beginnings in great poverty and her short height, she was a very powerful force for good and a tireless fighter for justice, and she held her own as the only woman in an all-male government. Now, he's got a clipping of her. Now, one of the ladies, who was it? She mentioned that she came to her school. Well, this is Ellen at Hardwick Central School, giving out prizes. There's a nice big bunch there. She's obviously a head girl or something, this girl, and the mayor was there. So that was Manchester Evening News, 1946. And she loved Manchester and Manchester people. She grew up here, of course, and she always came back whenever she could, although her life took her away to London and to the world. So she often returned to Manchester as a cabinet minister even, and this, you can see 1946, at that time, she was the only woman in the cabinet of Clement Attlee, the very famous cabinet that founded the National Health Service and big changes in schools. And here you can see her in Spain, and she's walking with Clement. When she was in Spain, she was shot at. She actually went on the front line, and she stood there because she believed so passionately in the Republican cause. She was a great socialist, and she was just fearless. During the 1940s, when London was in the Blitz, she used to walk about in the streets just with a tin hat, and like Churchill did, to inspire people. She showed completely no fear. She was actually in charge of emergency shelters. So here she is walking through the streets, looking at the bomb damage, and later on she actually went on the front line. So she also went to Detroit to support the car maker strikes. And when she returned from Spain, her plane was struck by lightning, and she was injured, but she still made her way to the House of Commons just in time to move her bill on hire purchase, because hire purchase companies, they're like loan sharks are today. In those days, it was 100, maybe more percent on people, things that people bought on hire purchase, and everybody bought on hire purchase because it just wasn't enough money. And if they failed to pay 3 times, the goods were taken away, although they may well have overpaid at least 3 times themselves because of the high interest for the goods. So it was a terrible system. People were exploited by the business. And despite her injuries, she went to House of Commons and she pushed through this bill, and she made it illegal to exploit people with hire purchase. Incredible woman, wasn't she? So let's see, where are we now? This is in the Blitz, when she was in charge of the air raid shelters. And as I say, she used to just walk around, completely ignoring the bombs. And she obviously had a bit of a charmed life, except that she did have health issues, which was she just put up with. So she kept up morale in the way. During a blackout, she collided with a lorry while she was driving around. She had a fractured skull, and she still turned up to work the next day to keep up the fight against the Nazis. An amazing woman who dedicated her life to justice for all. And here you can see her talking to the emergency workers during the Blitz. Interestingly enough, she as a Labour MP, she was known for the Jarrow March, which is, some of you might still remember, when the 200 men marched 300 miles from Jarrow to London to petition Parliament for the resuscitation of industry. These men were all in her constituency at her time. She was a member of Parliament for North East constituencies during most of her career, and she supported them when everyone else turned their backs on them. You know, people were literally starving. I think people forget that there was starvation in this country. These men, the Jarrow Marchers, there they are, the Jarrow Crusade. They walked on foot to London from Jarrow to present a petition to have their plight known to the government, and the government did nothing about it. And on their way, the ordinary people of this country, they used to meet them as they arrived in their towns. They gave them places to sleep, and they gave them food. It was mainly sandwiches, like ham sandwiches, and these men would put the ham into envelopes and post them back to their wives and children because they had literally nothing, and they'd eat the bread. And when they arrived in London, with Helen at the head of them, although she didn't go all the way because she's a member of Parliament, but she supported them throughout it, they were basically ignored, which was terrible, I think, for the government to do. Anyway, here's Helen, and I think this was around the time the Jarrow Marchers arrived in London, and you can see the huge numbers of people. Anyone recognize this place? You can see the lions, can't you? It's Trafalgar Square. So she did this at the same time. She was actually, well, around the same time, she went to Germany. She denazified Germany, which meant get rid of all the Nazi textbooks, introduce new ones to give an accurate view of history and for the children to grow up sort of decently. And she actually rescued refugee children personally at risk of her own danger on the Tsar. I mentioned that she was the first reporter before that to break the news of the advance into the Rhineland. She did other amazing things, all the while as an MP and working in London, but she visited the whole world. She visited Gandhi in India in his prison cell. She organized counter trials for the Nazis after the Reichstag was burnt down. And as I mentioned in the war, she actually took charge of the air raid shelters. So quite an extraordinary woman. And here she is in the 1945 cabinet. And you can see there, she's the only woman there looking very smart, right on the end. And on the left, as she would be, of everyone else. And there is the chap who, for a time, was her lover. Did anyone recognize him? Ernest? No. Morrison, the great-grandfather of, oh God, I don't like remembering his name, do you? He's the
Mandelson.
Mandelson, yes, the Vice Chancellor of MMU. So that's Morrison. Luckily, they didn't have children. Otherwise, well, it's unlucky in a sense, because then they wouldn't have had Mandelson. They'd had somebody else, wouldn't they? But anyway, that was one of her lovers. He was a married man, but his wife wasn't very well or something, and she never married herself. So that was the cabinet. Anyway, I think I've got a picture of her with Morrison, and there they are. This is during the war, when Morrison was Home Secretary and later on Foreign Secretary. So that's her again, and Morrison looking at London from the air, as it were. So she came from real poverty, and you're going to see pictures later of her house and the alleys and all that where she was brought up. And she became what she did through absolute grit and determination. And her father gave her a lot of that. He was a working class man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps in a way. And he gave her that kind of get up and go. But she really had some amazing grit and ability, of course. She even tried to topple Clement Attlee to make Morrison, her lover at the time, the Prime Minister. Thank God she failed. But when she put her mind to things, she tried to do big things all the time. Now, she had another lover. Now, this isn't meant to be gossip or anything, but it's a bit of interest. And just to show you what kind of extraordinary woman she was, this man was called Otto Katz. And he probably misled her, actually, because he was Stalin's main man in Europe. He was the main propaganda chief, and he also turned people like Kim Philby, you know, the British spy. And handsome chap. He had 12 aliases. And he was the top man that Stalin had for many years until Stalin, like with many other people, hanged him. But for a while, he was seeing Ellen Wilkinson and met her at a flat. And one extraordinary occasion, she had him in her Austin 7, MI5 were following them, and she shook him off. And she was in all the government spy agencies' dossiers, and she was a cabinet minister, but she didn't care. But anyway, that was the two fellows in her life. Now I'm going to play a little video, which I made. I made 2 videos for the show that I put on with Haley Doherty. And this is like a little bit of an introduction, going back from when she died all the way to childhood. And it's all the scenes from her life. It was a terrible winter, 1947, one of the hardest in memory. That's why you'll see lots of snow. So it's only a couple of minutes, so we'll watch this next. So, although she was born in great poverty and her mother couldn't afford healthcare when she was having her, so she was left crippled all her life. They did their best, and you know they had these kind of pictures. I guess they saved up and got that done. But it's kind of slightly misleading because they were lived in this little back-to-back house in Chorlton upon Medlock, had very little food. And maybe that's one reason, malnutrition. So she said herself that led to her not being as tall as she could be. So she was born on 8th of October, 1891 in 41 Coral Street. Third child, second daughter of Richard Wilkinson, a cotton worker who became an insurance agent and they were great pillars of the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And Methodists, of course, are wonderful for their sense of social justice and self-help, and they're the kind of people that she grew up with. Her father always said to her, "I have pulled myself out of a gutter. Everyone else should too." So he was quite a hard man. And interestingly enough, he was actually a conservative by his own sentiment. That's why I don't have a picture of him. You don't mind that, do you? But so that's her family with a mum. Oh, hello. What's going on? Right. So anyone recognize this school? This is the secondary school, I suppose, that she went to from the age of 11, Hardwick Higher Elementary Grade School, and it later became known as Ellen Wilkinson School. Now, I think it's still there, but it's no longer a school, and it's in Hardwick. So she started at 6 in an elementary school. She said it was filthy school with 5 classes in one room. They didn't have much money to clean it. Because she was ill throughout childhood, she was homeschooled for a couple of years. Her mother loved reading, and her mother sort of gave her that, instilled that into her. And later on, she read history herself at University of Manchester. So a great family, and it just shows how important parents are, doesn't it, to as much as teachers. So at the age of 11, she won the first of many scholarships, which paid for her tuition right through her life. And this is where she went to. So you had to pay to go to school. People forget that, especially to good schools in those days. She was known to be very outspoken and rebellious when she was at school, although she was little. And after 2 years there, she transferred to Stretford Road Secondary School for Girls. Now, I don't know if that's still around, but she went there. She said that was horrid and unimaginable. So she never had a very good time at school. But here is a school that you'll all recognize, hopefully. It's just down the road from you. It's Oswald Road School, where she worked as a trainee teacher after graduating. And she fell out with the headmaster because the headmaster didn't want the children to enjoy learning. It was rote learning, highly disciplined, and he used a cane a lot. And she fell out with him a lot. But she won a bursary, £25, a huge amount of money then, in 1906. And that's how she began to train as a teacher. So she went to Manchester Day Training College. Sorry, this is just before university. She went to Manchester Day Training College, and the other half of the week she went to Oswald Road School, which is still there, and she taught there. And that's where she discovered socialism. And she met a guy who was she was engaged to for a while, but it sort of bubbled over, and I'll show you his picture a little bit later. At 16, she joined the Longsight branch of the Independent Labour Party, and she became really, really into women's suffrage. And she saw that as a major issue of the day. In fact, men were terrible with how they dealt with women who wanted the vote and to have equality. When she was about 16, she stood on a cart and she gave a speech about how women should have equality, and stones and rocks were thrown at her. And she said to all the people who were throwing the stones, she said, at the moment, only criminals, lunatics and women don't have the vote. You obviously are the criminals and lunatics, and you can't even throw straight. Can you imagine that? She was hit as well, apparently, by one, although they wouldn't have deliberately tried to hit her, but what a brave woman. So there she is. I think this is around the time when she was going to university. She won the Jones Open History Scholarship in 1910, which got her to the university, and she became even more political there, learned much more about the past, and she came under the influence of Walter Newbold. Walter Newbold was this country's first communist member of parliament, and met her at Manchester University. He was from North Manchester, I think. They were engaged for a while, and she got on quite well with him, but apparently he never washed, and he did have a bit of a whiff. So this is written in the biographies. He thought that was as important as looking after society, but she obviously did. So Walter Newbold was her kind of boyfriend for quite a while. When he became the United Kingdom's first communist MP, it was basically broken off. She herself was a communist for a while until the Labour Party broke away from them. And she was quite disappointed in what happened in Soviet Russia. She became much more of a socialist than a communist. But they were always close friends after that. So here we have a little picture of her. Oh, have you had that one? Yes. Yes, this is the 1945 general election, but you can see how she was already now. She's quite polished, and she stood for parliament several times. She won in the 1930s, and 1945 was a kind of biggest victory for her. She's quite radicalized by the Russian Revolution of 1917, but as I say, she became more socialist. But she met Lenin. She had a long chat with him, and she met Trotsky, and she attended the Labor Union's Congress and Second Congress of Communist Women in Moscow. So it was a great background for her. November 1923, that's when she became the Gorton councillor, first political appointment. And my plays set around that when she met Shapoorji Saklatvala, who was a communist MP at the time. So this is 1923. She was mainly concerned about unemployment, housing, child welfare, and education. Just after this, after winning the ward of Gorton, she became the candidate for Middlesbrough East, and she stood a couple of times, eventually winning with a majority of 927, defeating the Conservatives, who had been members of parliament there for many years. So she had a great following. When she came into the House of Commons, there was huge excitement and lots of stuff about her in the papers. She was incredibly famous in this country. All the national newspapers, radio, people wrote books about her. And it was mainly things about, this really upset her because she was a serious politician, but it was all about the kind of clothes that she wore and her bright red hair. So she just felt that they were kind of trivializing what she does. She was even stopped from going into the Commons dining room by a policeman who didn't realize that she was a member of parliament because there were very few women. And I think she was the only one for a while. And he said, well, this is this dining room, madam, is only for men. And she said, well, I'm not a man, I'm a member of parliament. And she just kind of shoved past him. So nothing stood in her way. And she eventually got respect for her views and her fiery speeches. But initially, because all the news is written by men, I suppose, they wrote about how vivacious she looked rather than what she said. And she didn't really enjoy that. So she became like the unofficial spokesperson for women's rights in Parliament, and she encouraged open debate on birth control, which at that time was pretty extraordinary. You know, people were so conservative, but you know, she felt that women owned their own bodies. And she went on to achieve some great parliamentary victories. She won nearly every election she stood for, and she got bigger and bigger majorities. One of her great early achievements was to help widows get their pensions. And that was 1926. Before that, they just lost their pension when their husband died. So she always did little bits at a time, which made huge differences to women's lives. And she often attacked the government for decreasing their constant decrease of expenditure on women's training. That was really her main kind of interest. But in 1926, she supported the miners heavily, and she supported the general strike. And she voted for the Representation of the People Act, 1928, which gave all women aged 21 and over the vote. You can say, you can be thankful for a lot that she's done, and yet it's extraordinary that very little is known about her. You know, she said during that debate, "We are doing at last a great act of justice to the women of the country, just as we have previously opened the door to the older women. Tonight, we're opening it to those who are just entering on the threshold of life." So 21-year-olds got the vote. In 1929, Baldwin called the general election, and Ellen became a member of the National Executive of Labour, and she drafted the manifesto. Quite extraordinary achievement. And she was re-elected. So she's very famous, of course, for being the member of Jarrow and leading the Jarrow Crusade. Here you can see her again, her fist in the air. She was known as La Pasionara, La Pasionara in Spain, and she was very similar in the kind of her attitudes. She was there from 1934 to 1947, and she's still remembered in the Northeast, although she's very much a Manchester woman. And here's a little bit more of the famous Jarrow March. And these lads, you can see they were starving, but looked after by people as they continued on their way. 4th of November of that year, she presented the Jarrow petition to the House of Commons, signed by 11,000 citizens. And it concluded that the town cannot be left derelict, and your petitioners humbly pray that His Majesty's government and this honourable House should realise the urgent need that is required. And the government ignored it. And there was one Labour backbencher who said that it was an affront to the national conscience. So this is, let me just say, this is the, when they were seated en route. Remember, it was like over 200 miles that they marched. And besides this, she was also still working as a correspondent for the Sunday Referee. And she did the hire purchase agreements bill, which I mentioned earlier. And she stood up against Neville Chamberlain. She was one of the very few people in Parliament to oppose appeasement. And she was a firm supporter of Winston Churchill only because she hated fascism so much. Although she didn't really like Churchill and his attitude to women. But for her, it was really about defeating fascism and about justice. And she was doing all this really at the same time as being a member of Parliament looking after women's rights. In May 1940, Churchill, I suppose, thanked her in a way by making her parliamentary secretary at the Ministry of Pensions. And they had a mutual respect, actually, Ellen and Churchill, and they worked together quite a few times. And he recognized the fact that she was a great patriot of this country, as well as a great socialist, which he didn't like. So under Churchill also, she went into the Home Ministry, and we've seen the pictures of her as the minister in charge of emergency planning and war shelters. She was also, not many people realize, this is her at her desk, of course. She created safety for hundreds of thousands of Londoners in the underground, and she became known as the Shelter Queen. So there she is at her desk in Whitehall with her personal secretary. She also founded UNESCO, which was in April 1945, United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization. She wanted to ensure the world was civilized after the barbarity of war. And it was her idea to put scientific in the title of UNESCO, because she felt that scientists needed to be watched in a way so that they were more responsible, because she was horrified by the development of the atom bomb. So she founded UNESCO on the 22nd of November, 1946. And she said it would do great things. And of course it has. It's done wonderful things since now. She was Minister for Education. Oh, I'm going to have to go to my other slides. It's going to look a bit messy, this, sorry. Oh no, we'll just stick to this. Yeah, so she was Minister of Education, and she created the three-tier system: grammar schools, secondary, modern, technical schools. I don't think there's many technical schools left now, are they? And she did a very good thing by her socialist principles. She raised the school leaving age from 14 to 15. Today, kids leave at 16, and they think that's young. Before her, they left at 14. and it was basically just factory fodder. So she hopefully created a system where everybody had more opportunity. And she also provided free milk for children, free milk, because they knew that the vitamins and protein and so on was absolutely necessary after the war. And it helped a lot of children develop more healthily because of her instituting free milk. Of course, after a few years afterwards, 40 years afterwards, it was another woman who took the milk away, wasn't it? I don't remember who that was. So, and she also created 400,000 extra spaces for children with a lot of the prefab schoolrooms that you might remember. Maybe you went in yourselves, and 37,000 extra teachers. So she did really quite amazing things. So Wilkinson had bronchial asthma, and she aggravated that by heavy smoking and overwork for many years. Eventually, sadly, she passed away on the 3rd of February, 1947 in St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington, found in a coma, and they found an empty bottle of pills by her. She had barbiturates, which were taken quite often by people in those days. Her cause of death was given as heart failure, accelerated by barbiturate poisoning. And some people believe because of a failed relationship with Herbert Morrison, because of overwork, and the possibility at that time of a man, after all she'd done, being given her job in cabinet because she was too ill to continue, I guess. It all was too much. And she's actually buried in Penn in Buckinghamshire. So there's very little about her in Manchester. There's a plaque on the Ellen Wilkinson building. I think you might have seen that. There's the Ellen Wilkinson School as it was, but nothing else. So maybe we could start a campaign to have an Ellen Wilkinson statue in Manchester. What do you think? Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that rundown of her life story. I've got a final video, which is longer. And this is a little more detail and more pictures about the kind of things that she achieved. So I'll play that next.
You ask how much I need you. Must I explain?
Oops, sorry.
You ask how much I need you.
Sorry, it's going a bit funny. Let's try that again. Right.
You ask how much I need you. Must I explain? I need you, oh my darling, like roses need rain. You ask how long I love you, I'll tell you true. Until the 12th of never, I'll still be loving you. Hold me close, never let me go. Hold heart like April snow. I'll love you till the bluebells forget to
That's the video. Hope you enjoyed the talk. I think you said, Helen, that you've got time for questions. Is that right?
Yeah. If anybody wants to ask a question. Firstly, thank you, Nakib. That was a lovely talk, actually. I really enjoyed the little video clips that you managed to get in as well. It was nice that it just brought it all out. So has anybody got any questions? I'll see if I can see anybody's hand up. I'll just scroll across. Yes, I can see. Is it Malgor? Sorry, you're on mute.
Malgorzata.
Yeah.
What I am amazed by, this woman has managed to achieve so much in her life, and yet she's hardly known. And when I was looking at some pictures of hers, there was a similar posture to Margaret Thatcher. And I thought, my goodness, why is this one so known and that one isn't? But what I'm also amazed, in many countries, including my old country, there are very committed left-wing women who are wiped out of history. That somehow doesn't happen to the right-wing women. I don't know whether I'm sort of on the track or can somebody pick up my thoughts, because I was thinking, goodness, this woman has done so much. And I've also met many women who started the initial Human Rights Committee and various other things, who were Manchester women. One was the head of Wilbraham School. Penny, her name was, I don't know the surname. Such magnificent women, and we don't know anything about them. How can we recover those lives? Because young generation will need them. That something like this, so human and so compassionate, existed in politics. Thank you.
Well, that's great to know. I mean, well, Helen's doing something about it. She's putting a talk on.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, Mrs. Thatcher was more of a man than men in many ways. She said herself, didn't she? And she never really did anything for women's rights. She herself, I suppose, thought was a great example of being one, whereas Ellen did. And as you say, she's forgotten, which is quite bizarre.
And yet so much damage was done by Margaret Thatcher, because I worked in mining villages. I was responsible for mental health strategy there, and I was picking up human stories, what that woman did, and yet she's so well known. And look at Ellen. Sorry, I'm just, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Well, shall we make a start? Thank you for
Yeah, sure.
joining us, everybody. And we'd like to welcome Nakib again. Happy New Year, Nakib, and thank you for preparing this talk for us on Ellen Wilkinson.
Thank you.
Nakib, anybody else want to? Philip?
Yes, Margaret Thatcher's family were not well-to-do. They were just grocers. But my real question is, why would she go to Oswald Road School? Did they move to Chorlton, the family?
Oh, she was in Oswald Road School as a trainee teacher. That's the only reason that she went there.
I thought you said that she was hit by the teachers.
No, she wasn't hit, but she fell out with the headmaster because that story about Oswald Road School, headmaster walked into one of her classes when she was like a trainee teacher, probably about 19 when she was doing that. And he noticed the boys were all kind of eagerly looking forward, and they were listening to her, and some were kind of moving around a little bit, all paying close attention because they were fascinated by her stories about history. And he said, why are the boys not sitting straight with their arms down? Apparently they had to sit like this or something in class in those days. And she said, because they're interested. I'm getting them interested in this. And I think she was getting them to act out stuff. And he was really annoyed with her because she wasn't disciplining them and making them sit straight, ramrod straight like they're supposed to. So she actually got a telling off by the district inspector of schools, although she carried on. But what he said to her was, I don't think you've got much of a future in Manchester schools. Why don't you become a missionary?
Is there any plaque in Oswald Road School, Nakib, about her? There's nothing in the school.
Nothing. They probably don't know, actually. If they knew, I bet they would do something. They, but I doubt if she was there more than a few weeks or months when she was training.
Okay, Val, do you want to come in?
Well, it's just an observation, really. I mean, comparing her with Margaret Thatcher, who married a multimillionaire, divorced multimillionaire, and had nannies for her twins and stuff, and wasn't a heartbroken mistress of a prominent man like Ellen Wilkinson. It's interesting, all the photographs, I think I saw only one woman standing in the distance alongside. She was constantly surrounded by men. I think she got on very well with men. She was very feisty and very charismatic, but it was very lonely for her. I mean, she wasn't fighting other women to get to where she was fighting men, and men did not give women status at the time of her existence. And I think, you know, she did remarkably well, and it's really sad we don't acknowledge that, particularly in this city. And it would be good to have a campaign, because she achieved so much in her relatively short life. That's all.
It's interesting you say that, because her only ally in Parliament for a long time was Nancy Astor, but Nancy Astor was a Conservative, and so she really didn't have any help in that respect. And every time, although she did amazing things, as one of the ladies was saying, the papers just didn't really support her. She said they treated her like a pet. You know, saying what color her dress was that day and what her hairstyle was. Yeah. So it was a lot of sexism there. But Nancy Astor was her only kind of colleague that.
They couldn't be more different, could they?
No, they couldn't.
No.
But there's that other, it's completely gone out of my head. Isn't her name Barbara, the other feisty redhead that came?
Barbara from Blackburn, Castle.
Barbara Castle from Bradford.
Barbara Castle was really inspired by Ellen Wilkinson to become.
Yes, well, some similarities there.
Yeah.
Other ways.
But of course, Barbara Castle, was she rich? But she went to Oxford, didn't she? But I don't know if she was very wealthy.
No. Tom, I think you want to come in.
I just found it very sad that because of the suffocating morality of the time, Morrison, who she had a relationship with, didn't go to her funeral and didn't even send a wreath, because he could not admit to this sort of behaviour.
Yeah.
Well, and says it all, doesn't it?
Well, she was quite heartbroken because he was in hospital and she wasn't allowed to phone him because only a relation. So she didn't know how he was doing and what was happening to him at that time as well. So it was everything was against her. Morrison was a bit of a character himself, though, wasn't he? I think he. I think she fell in love quite easily, and he was probably the wrong fella.
Yeah. Does anybody want to ask anything else or make any other observations? I mean, that was quite interesting, wasn't it? Listening to that, like that. So Nakib, even when you put your play on about Ellen, there was no sort of momentum after that from the town, as it were.
Well, it was mentioned in the news and a few other things, but no, I've heard that there's another play about her which is going on in Jarrow area. So maybe, but no, I was hoping the National Theatre would take it up or somebody, but.
Yes, yeah, never know. Might be in years to come she gets recognition after our time.
You just need somebody to start a campaign for her, and the People's History Museum have her as a great radical, so they'd support it. But somebody needs to kind of take up and get a statue, get the third woman statue in Manchester.
Going. There you are, Tom. Are you offering?
I think there is a statue of her in the northeast.
Well, it was supposed to be in 2020, wasn't it? But is it actually up there now?
I don't know. I was
talking about it.
The Simcock who went to talk to the people behind it. But there were very sort of firm plans for the statue to go up in the northeast.
All right. I can't see anybody else with their hands up or wanting to. So thank you for those of you who have asked a question, and thank you again, Nakib, for taking the time. There were lots of pictures there, so thank you very much, Nakib. Thank
You're welcome.
you.
Thank you.
And